my poor whole book is highlighted. Okay. Oh!
And we're back with book 2 of Mere Christianity. We did one last week of book 1, and so we're going to go through all of them throughout the whole Lent season to see what this book is about. And again, we started doing this because this is the third or fourth time I've read through this book, and I just find it super fascinating. I think it explains or clears up misconceptions that both Christians and non-Christians have about Christianity.
It's essentially my first time with this book. Like Sal's discussed it a couple of times, and he's like, "Oh, in Mere Christianity, they have this, or this says this." Or whenever I am curious about something, I'll come to him and I'm like, "Hey, what did this book say about it?" But now it's my first read through. Pretty interesting. It's been helping me solve some underlying thought processes.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised. As I was reading it the first time, it honestly kind of pissed me off. I didn't like some of the way that things were worded. I'm not sure anymore what it was, but it was because it was like a hard truth to hear, I think, or a hard truth to read. And I was like, "Ah, how dare you?" and then later, as I reflected and processed it and kind of just like chewed on it for a while, I was like, "Oh shoot, it's that the truth hurts." And accepting that that nothing's perfect in life, I guess, and that it's okay for it not to be perfect, right? But learning from those experiences, because if you're not challenged by any of those experiences, you're not going to have any growth either as a person. And so it's interesting. It's challenging and beautiful at the same time.
Yep. All right, let's get into the first chapter of book 2 is Rival Conceptions of God. And let's see. My notes are here. I have Christians here. Here's already one that feels like a misconception, or at least I've heard it from others, as Christians don't have to believe all other religions are wrong. And I love that he said that. And I guess just also a little more for backstory. This is by C.S. Lewis, so this isn't like a religious text per se. Like he's obviously a Christian, but he's not like a pastor or a priest or whatever. Like he's not any of those. He purposely mentioned that he's an amateur and likes to discuss all this stuff, but he for sure is like a higher level than beginner, but lower level than like the super I guess knowledgeable about it. And
he was actually an atheist turned Christian, right?
Yeah, I think I don't remember if he was Christian, atheist, then back to Christian, or just atheist then.
I scratched my watch.
Why would you do that?
It's broken.
And so I think I've heard that on several occasions that Christians just kind of look down on other religions and like that's wrong or whatever, and that type of stuff annoys me. And so it was good to hear that from this one. And that's what I was trying to get at. That I asked one other friend of mine that was very Christian, like how is this book viewed among Christians? And I thought it was interesting. He mentioned that this is almost seen as the, I want to say, fifth gospel. I don't know how many there are in that they write about Jesus or whatever, and that this is almost regarded as an extra one because they thought it was so good that it was. So I was like, oh, that's good to hear.
It says that in the book though, also.
It does?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I don't remember that. And so, was that like in the preface or something?
Yeah, somewhere.
Okay.
It said it for sure in this book. I don't know where exactly.
Yeah, so it is well received among Christians. So I also liked that credibility, that it wasn't just like Christians are going to easily dismiss it. Oh, well, like C.S. Lewis didn't know what he was talking about or whatever. And so I do like that perspective of it. And like we mentioned last week too, that it feels like a very Christian for Dummies book because it does explain a lot of stuff in a more chewable form. And even then, it's still like something that you hear, or at least I listen to it on an audiobook, and then it's like, wait, pause, and I have to like really interpret, yeah, and like, what exactly did he just say? What does that mean, and how does that mean it, or what? So, yeah, so that was the first one. Christians don't have to believe other religions are wrong. Anything else you wanted?
I don't think I took any notes on that. I mean, I did take a note right after that, but I don't think it has to do exactly with.
Yeah, he mentions that other religions contain some hint of the truth, and that should be, I guess, pretty okay with it. All right, and going in.
I'm gonna touch on that one real quick. I just read it right now. Like I was like, oh, that's cool. He's talking about the biggest divisions. I'm trying to think if you had already taken a note on it or not. Anyway, he talks about a division. He says people who all believe in God can be divided according to the sort of God they believe in. And then there are two different ideas of this subject. One is that he's good beyond good and evil, right? Did you write anything like that?
Is that in the pantheist one?
No, not yet.
No? Oh.
No. It's talking about the human point of view.
Oh, okay. I do remember that. No, I don't think I wrote much.
And then it's like these people would say that the wiser you become, the less you would want to call anything good or bad, and the more clearly you would see that everything is good in one way and bad in another, and that nothing could have been different. That was so fascinating to me. It's like kind of a mind F because, well, we look at the word wise with a person that is wise has higher knowledge, right? Like you've gone through stuff, you're challenged with so many different things, and then you become wiser. The more interactions you have, the more books you read, the more learned you are, right? And so I was like, oh, wise is a good thing. And then it continues to go saying that the wiser you become, the less you want to call anything good or bad. And I was like, ooh, okay. So then it goes back to like the good and the bad. And for every situation you have good, and for every situation you can have bad. But it just depends on how you look at it. Because it's the way that you yourself, your person, is calling this. It's your judgment on it. And in the book, it continues to go saying, that like cancer. Cancer, for all of us, we'd say that that's bad. But then there could be something else that says that cancer itself, what does it say? We call cancer bad, but that would, because it kills man, but you might just as well call a successful surgeon bad because he kills the cancer. Right? And so, like, the definition of good and bad, of course, I think cancer is awful. And I'm like, yeah, go surgeon. Right? But then we're going to the villain of cancer. But I think humanity, probably like animals or different situations, different areas, like you could have a really beautiful plant, right? And then you plant it in the middle of the jungle, and that thing takes over the jungle, and now you have weeds all over, and it's killing the native species. Now it's bad, right? Instead of like one time we had bought a package of seeds, remember, like from Cheerios. They were sending packages, right. And then later on they sent like this disclaimer out. They're like, don't plant these, like they're not native to your area, and it's gonna like kill all of your other good stuff. So they were trying to do something good, but in turn it ended up being bad. Yeah. And so there's good and bad with every situation. It's kind of opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, we had that like on a podcast thing too, right? Where it was pretty much intentions versus outcome. Like the intention was good. It was trying to be like, but also the outcome isn't always what your intention is.
I'm sorry. I kind of went tangential on that, but it was really fascinating to me. Yeah.
Do you have anything else between there and the pantheist thing?
No, that's the thing that's highlighted for me.
Yeah, so pantheist belief is that pretty much that the universe and God are are one. That
The universe is God, and God
yeah,
is
yeah.
the universe. Everything is God.
Mm-hmm. And I guess he goes on to say that it could make sense, but then starts pointing out how this can't entirely be true, and even goes on to mention that God created the universe like a man creating a picture, and so you can say that anything you make, like a picture or a painting, you can say that there's a lot of that person in the painting, but that doesn't mean it's actually physically in there, or even then like your essence, your being isn't actually in there. You created it, but once the painting dies or you die, either or are still left behind, and that's why he disagrees with the pantheist thing, that once one goes, the other one is still there, or at least in God's in this situation, if the universe goes, then God essentially is still there. Our stupid clock, I can hear it.
Oh, you can? Oopies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're discussing that, because don't I don't understand it 100% why it could be wrong. Like, I understand the whole analogy of the painting, right? Like, you create this thing and then you just leave it there, or like, because I like pantheism. I think it was like cool. I liked their perspective, I guess. Thinks that God beyond good and evil is called pantheism. And
Yeah, I guess that from that.
usually believe that God, so to speak, animates the universe as you animate your body.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess if your soul was God, then your body is what your soul is acting through or whatever. And it goes on to say that that's...
And then the Christian idea says it's quite different. They think God invented and made the universe, like a man making a picture, composing a tune. And he does not die if his picture is destroyed.
Correct. So if you made a picture and they destroy your painting, that doesn't mean
that you died.
Yeah, or...
So would a pantheist believe then if you destroyed that picture, then you destroyed God? Or a piece of God?
Yeah, I guess through the pantheist belief is that if you destroyed something that is part of God, like if the whole everything is part of God and you destroy a tree or the planet, you're essentially destroying a part of God. And I think that's where he's saying that that's incorrect, that doesn't, that they are two separate things. He creates, and that it's its own thing now, and he's still independent from that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, but how do they know?
Well,
how does one discern that? Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah,
he says it. He does say that. I remember right here. I even highlighted it. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there were no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning.
And the first time I heard that was super mind-blowing to me. I was like, what? Because I feel like I couldn't refute that, I guess. Like if what was the line with no eyes? If there was no light.
If there was no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark.
Yeah, so dark would be a word without meaning. Mm-hmm. And so I guess essentially you're saying that with eyes you have the sensors for light, whether there's little light or no light or a lot of light. And through this same analogy is saying that you have the sensor for that, so then why would we have that sensor if it was to be used, I guess?
Well, could dark be, because that's what you see, that's what one would see is complete dark, so then wouldn't that be the definition of dark? Dark is what we see. Dark is this is dark.
Yeah, but I think what he's saying is if dark was the only like baseline, why would dark have a meaning? Like it would just be standard. Like I guess now we know it as dark and light, but why would it be? We wouldn't know it as the same meaning as dark, that there is no light. It would just be kind of baseline. This is what normal or regular
But it would still have
is.
a definition.
How do you mean?
Like dark would be what we are in.
I guess I think it was still like the same with your ears or sound. If no sound existed and we had ears or whatever, then there would be no reason to know what sound is. Does that make sense?
Yes, a little bit more.
So pretty much all of our senses, like if we have those senses, but they really did nothing, or like if we have ears and we can't distinguish that a sound exists or no sound
like...
or loud sound or soft sound, then what would be the point of having ears? And so I think that's what he's saying. He's like, why have this tool if it has no use? So why would you have eyes if you didn't need to?
And so what are they talking about then here? What does it relate back to?
I from what I remember, he was trying to talk about like, and even going back to the last book, the human nature, the law of human nature, that we always have kind of a standard to measure it to, and it's not really a taught standard. It's just kind of we're always feeling like a sort of unfairness or whatever, and that's kind of what he mentioned too. Is like we have a standard to measure human behavior. Is like if you're saying this is a crooked line, you wouldn't know it's a crooked line unless
You knew what a straight line
yeah,
was.
unless you had it. And so I think that's kind of the point that all of this is trying to make, is that you have the sensor for it, but what would that sensor be there for if you're not, if like there's no anything to measure with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think there are many... I don't know if it's my science brain working. Because then wouldn't that just be ignorant to not investigate differences like that? Like, so you have this sensor, or okay, so let's talk about one that has recently come up. Not even recent. I mean, we're talking at least 10 to 12 years ago. They started a study on charisma, right? And so we know that there are different people and they have different levels of charisma. But we didn't know that charisma could be measured.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an actual energy output that can be measured. Right? And so wouldn't it be ignorant to not to be like, "Oh, there's something here," and to not investigate it? Like
No, and I guess
so like with darkness, I guess. Like okay, so you know that there's oh, okay,
well, I guess
darkness isn't a good one though
no.
to like
I,
like a spidey sense, right? Like
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
like all of a sudden there's a sixth sense that I like
Mm-hmm.
and then you talk to somebody else and they're like, wow, I have that same thing too. And then you talk to somebody else, okay, so you're just gonna be like, oh, everybody has this.
Yeah.
I think it would be so ignorant for you not to continue to research it, or to continue to talk about it with other people and be like, hey, do you have this too? What do you think this is? And then like
Correct.
investigate and continue to learn. You're not just gonna be like, oh yeah, this thing, we don't know what it is.
No, and I think that's all he's saying, that like acknowledge that you have that sense, and
the sense is going to religion, like oh, some kind of human morality.
correct, yeah, like some sort of standard that we should be living up to, and that we apparently innately have that, whether you're taught it or not, that you'll always kind of be like, why, like feel like, why did this person do this? They should have done this. Or even within yourself, I guess, like we're always measuring, seems like we're always measuring to a standard of behavior. And so I guess that's what he's saying. It's like, why have that standard if there was nothing to measure it with?
God, and to me that's so difficult because it's such a biased test. Because we're taught, like the majority of us are taught this. it's modeled by our parents, it's modeled by family, it's modeled by friends, and then once you get into the school system,
But
you have different.
correct, but I think that's the point that he's trying to make, is that it's still an innate thing whether you're a Christian of Christian belief or not. Like, even though it's modeled or whatever, it's still innate. Like, it's still, I guess, passed on for a reason. Like, even if somebody were to be born without influence, and then somebody else comes along and they start doing different things, you would eventually feel like, oh, well, why are they doing that? How come they're not acting in this way? You know what I mean?
Is that innate or learned though?
I think that's the point.
Because that's you learn from other people. Like, you learn. That's what we were just saying, right? Is like you learn from your interactions. So like, how is that innate? Like, just.
Wait, I guess that's what.
That's confusing.
So if you were to be born on a desert island with no. Imagine you can live up to whatever, like nobody took care of you as a baby or whatever. You just grew up on your own, managing by yourself without prior influence. Mm-hmm. Then you do start interacting with others, even though you didn't have that other influence. I think at some point you would start feeling like these people you just met are treating you unfairly, or at least at some point, like, oh, well, I don't like that. How come? And you start measuring them to this standard that, like, where did I get this standard from? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I would think that that's still learning. That's learned.
How, if you were on a desert island by yourself, like?
Because you're seeing how the other people are interacting. I still think that there's some kind of influence there.
I suppose.
I'm trying to. I'm really, really trying to follow it. But if the person was on a deserted island, they would start to follow the social constructs of whatever animals they saw, of those interactions. So it's not innate, it's still learned.
Okay. But
right? So then they would understand, like, this is what I do. And then they come in contact with, like, the other people, right? Like, I don't know, they get there to the island and they start to do whatever they're doing. That person that was by themselves before already begins to learn from the interactions that the others are doing, mm-hmm. right? And they're looking at facial expression. They're looking at, like, the way that they sound, the way that their body language is. Even if they're not understanding them, they're still learning from those interactions, and then they make it applicable to themselves. Right? Like, isn't that how we learn?
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying is, this is confusing to me because it is such a fine line between when you're trying to do this in a behavioral observation, with behavioral observations, right? Like, your brain actually picks up on things so much quicker, and we're like, oh, that's innate. Well, it wasn't innate. It was learned because you saw two ants fighting over a breadcrumb. Or, do you know what I mean? Like, you already learned that. I do agree. I do think that some things are innate. But I was trying to, I'm happy that we're talking about it, because when I read it, I was like, huh? Like, how does this make sense? It still doesn't it makes more sense, but it doesn't make complete sense to me. Maybe on, like, the fourth read, then I'll understand it. But,
or maybe if it's not dark, then think of it opposite. What if, imagine the sun was always out? Why would you have the need to have any sort of light, like a flashlight or a light bulb? If it was always bright, then why would there be any need for a flashlight?
Because of a happy accident. Right? You finally go, so you're in your house and you don't have any light, but you have doors and you have a box, and now you can't see inside of there.
No, but that's the point that he's trying to make, that now a darkness exists. That's why you would need the light. If there was no darkness, if there was no darkness, if you only had consistent bright light, like why would there be any need for having flashlights or anything? Why would there be the need for having candles or like, well, if you're using a candle for light or whatever? Does that make sense?
Yeah, because you create a different environment.
What do you mean?
Like
Like say not in a house. Like say you lived out in.
like there's continuous light.
Yeah.
Like everything is lit all the time. There are no doors, there's only windows.
No, not even. Like let's say you just lived outside. Why would there be any reason to have a flashlight?
So in my head, what happened is there's so many trees because it's so whatever, and there's a bunch of shade now.
Correct. But that shade is creating a darkness.
Yes.
It's creating a difference in light.
Right. Okay, so there's no shade.
Correct. So that's, I guess, the point he's trying to make is that why have something if you didn't need it, kind of deal. So if somebody gave you a flashlight and you were kind of completely always in light, they'd be like, this is kind of a useless thing. Why would I need this thing?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need, like, it shines a big bright light in my eyes, but like other than that, like outside, like I can't even see what it's actually doing.
Okay.
So then why have that tool? Unless once you come across that situation that you're like, oh, now I understand why I need this, because now I can't see or whatever, like it's getting dark, and so now you use it. So I think that's the same thing he's trying to say here. That's the whole, I guess, flipped it on darkness versus light. So why do we have this tool if we didn't have, if there was no use for it, kind of?
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. One of those words, like, yep. Yep, you cracked open the door. Got it. Okay. He's like, you fucking stubborn as shit. How long did that take? That took like 18 minutes trying to explain that to me. I think I got it.
All right, and then the next chapter is the invasion. And this one I did like, because like even this first one I wrote down, it says religion is not simple, even things as simple as a table. And I liked that he mentioned this because he goes on to mention like scientific parts of a table. It's like it's made of atoms. You can ask a scientist to explain this to you or whatever. And even something as simple or meaningless as a table is still very complicated in its own.
Mm-hmm.
And so he tries to say that people try to make a simple version of Christianity, and I guess you plead the ignorance card that like this is like, well, this is kind of what I'm going to follow because this is kind of as much as I know. And like if you have the capacity to learn more, then you kind of should learn more about it. And it was like you're willingly ignoring that which is not simple, kind of deal. I forgot how he phrased it.
Real things are not simple.
Yeah. And so I guess anything has a different level of complexity, and so don't just ignore it just because I guess you don't want to, or you want to make it simple because that's how it fits better into your life. It's more out of convenience than.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I guess starts getting into dualism too. That dualism is more the idea of a good versus evil. And the reason they disagree with, like, that makes sense to an extent, but he still says that that's not the Christian belief, that it's not necessarily a good versus bad, because good has to come out as the correct answer. And the reason for that is like it can't just be a matter of preference, that whether, like if it was just good versus bad, then you can just kind of pick a team, like, oh, I'm going to be on the good team or I'm going to be on the bad team. And
are we recording again?
yeah. All right. Some slight technical difficulties with, but we were saying that, so it can't be just good versus bad and picking a team. That good has to come out on top. It goes on to mention that badness is essentially spoiled goodness. It had to have started as good and then slowly kind of rots and then turns into badness. Does that make sense still?
Yep. It's just that there was something that I was going to say. And I lost my train tracks. What was it? Oh, it was that. Sorry, I yelled into the mic there. Um, that you must be on the same ground, right? Like you must have the same definitions as like whoever you're speaking to, I guess, because then you end up nowhere and it's a waste of your time. For people that are trying to like simplify religion so that like you both don't have the same common ground or the same knowledge. Like so in order to discuss it, you have to have the same basic information. That way you know what you're talking about. Because if you don't, then you're just going to end up, I guess, chasing your tail. And that sounds really familiar with some of the conversations that you had with one of your friends. That it was just like, it was endless. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you got into to looking all of this stuff up, is to educate yourself, to be able to discuss it at an educated level rather than just like, no, you're right, no, you're wrong, and it was interesting because our kid just had that happen. I don't know if you were there, but there was a conversation. So we were at a birthday party and our kid was playing with another kid and they're both there like arguing like, you lost, no, you lost, and they honestly didn't know what they were even winning or losing at. Like they were both just sitting there, and then rules. It was like two boys arguing, and then the little girl comes down the slide and she's like, could you guys please stop and move out of the way? I'm trying to play here. Right. And I thought it was fascinating because neither of them had the correct information, right? Like they didn't know what the heck was going on. And I think that, but they were both right, and I think that happens a lot more than we'd like to admit, probably. Mostly because, like, me personally, it happens to me a lot because I'm learning now, but I didn't care to listen, right? I was thinking about what I was going to say before. I was like, I heard something, I knew I needed to respond to it, and I didn't care to listen to the rest of a person's thought. And that was really poor. That was really, really poor. But I didn't know. That. I guess it was a problem, And it's not until later when you start to learn and you start to process and you actually listen for a second that, like another person's feelings are valid. But it was just selfish of me. I did grow up an only child and I was the one that was listened to all the time. I didn't have to listen to anybody else.
Or share your listening time.
So I'm actively working on that.
That's what it goes on to say that the devil story is of a fallen angel, that he was once good and then corrupted and turned bad. And the invasion of this, the name of this chapter is essentially referring to that Christianity is pretty much a spiritual civil war, that we landed in enemy territory and trying to change the world back to good. So I guess we landed in something that I guess not necessarily is corrupted, but can be corrupted, and so you have to change it back. That's the one part I was a little confused about. Like, so is the world bad, or is it just because bad does exist that we have to try to minimize it and change it back to good? So I was a little confused about that.
I was too, mainly because it didn't feel like there was any solution to it. I was like, okay, so we're all effed or what?
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't sound good, and this was in the 40s. Or like, I'm there with you. I had written the same things down because it says Christians, the world is good and gone wrong. Like, okay, so what's the resolution, I guess?
All right, take 3. Stupid technical difficulties.
Like big ones. Okay. Go ahead.
We're going to move on to the next one. Next chapter is the shocking alternative. And so this one was, I guess, talking about free will. At least that's what it started with. And so it's like, one of the main arguments is if God is all good, then why not just make us good? And this one was a fascinating one that I loved. And so why be given the choice? And pretty much it said that free will is what makes all good things worth having. So, and I always think of those dichotomies, even like how we were just saying right now, the light versus dark. Like one can't exist without the other. There can be no dark if there is no light, and there can be no good without bad or whatever. And so I think this is kind of what the free will is getting at, that in order for you to actually appreciate, I guess, the good, there has to be the bad. And that's why the free will is there, so you can actually choose and realize that those things are worth having.
Yes.
And then mentions that unhappiness comes from trying to find... Oh, this one was fascinating. So unhappiness comes from trying to find other things that make us happy. So it's essentially saying that like when people try to find other things that makes them happy, like money or fame or etc., and that happiness doesn't last, and I guess that's kind of your spiritual tank being low, that God designed the human engine to run on God. And that if you are not using... Hi. That
It's just,
tell me bless me.
I did say bless you,
Okay.
I think, but I thought it was funny that it surprised you more than anything.
Yeah, I felt it coming. I thought I could hold it off, and I didn't.
The way you after your things cracks me up.
And so, the God designed humans to run
on God.
On God. And I thought that was super fascinating. Also, that I guess even if you're not a Christian, I think, to me at least, the point of it was just to do good things and you'll feel a little more fulfilled. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You mentioned
This made
else.
me question, I guess, like, what about people who are happier without, well, I guess you would end up calling them like psychological disorders, right? Like if a person had a psychological disorder, they wouldn't be happy with the good. I watch too many serial killer things. And like that makes them happy. That's what their happiness comes from. But it's wrong. Like it's bad. Like you can't take other people's lives away. You should not do that. Right? And so when you that's it was kind of like Dexter was popping into my head when I was reading this, because I was like, well, it makes him happy and it's like for the better because he's like an anti-hero, or do you know what I mean? And so like all of that kept popping up and I was like, well, what about that? Like,
but I guess that's what they're saying, that the unhappiness usually comes from trying to find happiness in other things. So meaning you probably keep killing and stuff to fill that void, and that fuel only lasts so long, and that's why you have to keep doing it, because you're trying to run the engine on something that it isn't meant to run on.
So a person that is filled with God all the time is always happy?
I don't think
so. Like a priest or a pastor, or are we not going to be happy all the time because we're human?
And actually I should have, it didn't say unhappiness in that sense, but it did. That's kind of how I interpret it, and I missed the exact wording. I don't know if you can find it in there, but so that's my fault a little bit. That's just kind of how I interpreted it. But it wasn't exactly unhappiness. It was just, I guess, maybe a fulfillment of life. Like you don't feel as fulfilled.
This is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. That?
No.
Terrific energy, some fatal flaw. He left us our consciousness, the sense of right and wrong.
It was right around where, I don't know if you wrote it down also with with humans being designed to run on God. It would be right before it.
Dang it, I remember this. I remember reading it, but I don't know if I took note of it. Nope, because I'm already on the last page. Uh-oh. I didn't write it down.
That's okay. But I guess essentially it mentioned, I guess you can interpret it as an unfulfillment versus fulfilled. Like,
I I didn't write it down. I did write down one that said, well, he says, you make a thing voluntary, then half of the people do not do it. That is not what you willed, but your will has made it possible. God created things which had free will. This means that creatures can go either way. But I didn't take a lot of notes in this one for some reason.
section.
Yeah. Unless the speaker is God, this is really preposterous to be a comic. About forgiveness of sins. Do you remember about that part?
No, I don't. Oh, isn't that later in the? Did you already skip to the third chapter in that book? Oh no.
I guess that's where I'm at.
The shocking alternative.
Yeah.
No, that's where we are. I thought he didn't mention until the next part, but we can move on if you want. There wasn't really much. The only other thing I have was, oh yeah, that Jesus said he was God, and among pantheism, we would all be in God. So that's one thing that, like, I guess, like in other religions and spiritual views, that if we're all in one thing, in one being, that this definitely did not make sense to say that one person is God, because the pantheist belief is that everyone is within God. So for him to just say that he is God, it was like that removing the God from all the physical things. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one I found fascinating in this chapter was like, if that you can't say that Jesus, well, that you may not believe the stuff Jesus said, or that you can accept him as a great moral teacher, and goes on to say that, like, that wasn't an option, that he left that the person that existed, Jesus, like, the stuff he said was either that of a lunatic or that he was the devil himself. And so it was like, he didn't leave you that option to think that he was a great moral teacher. It was like, that sounded super, like, in your face, like, dang.
I found the words that you were looking for. It's this first little paragraph here.
Why don't you read it?
God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. Oh, they right above it. God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. That sounds very, like, binary.
Say that again, or read it again.
God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess that's what. Yeah, that's essentially the same thing as you trying to find all these other ways, and they don't. I guess to me, that's how I interpret it. You'll be left unfulfilled, like.
And then it says, but it seems to start up all right and runs a few yards, and then it breaks down. They're trying to run it on the wrong juice. That is what Satan has done to us humans. See, but guys, this is the stuff that I'm still, like, chewing on. And I'm like...
And maybe that's one of those things, too, that we leave for interpretation. And I guess to me, it always does seem a little more. I don't know the word, like kind of comical or juvenile, even in a sense. I was trying to say like simplifying when it's like the devil and whatever, and I understand there could be like a deeper meaning, but like it's just been so, I don't know, almost comically done in our culture that it's like hard to picture it non-comically, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
because when you're saying that, like, I see. Yeah, no, I totally understand. But that's why it's. I get the good and the bad, the
mm-hmm.
internal struggle. But I guess to name it, like, oh, Satan's the one that did this to you. Like, a person also has their free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that every person has their free will. So if you have that free will and you know your moral standards, then how is it that Satan is the one that made you do it?
I guess not that made you do it, but it's like the whole can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So it's like he places it very conveniently in front of you to where you're like, oh, this is the super easy way out, and I'm gonna take it, kind of deal. I think that's maybe my interpretation of it, but I don't know. Let's move on. So the next chapter is the perfect penitent, and this one he also goes on to describe that sometimes when something is super complicated, they give you a simplified explanation. So let's say there was something scientific that was like an engineer or chemist has something super complicated and they're trying to explain it to somebody with not the same knowledge. It's like they give you a simpler picture, but that doesn't mean that's exactly how it works. It's just a picture to help you understand. And so that was what this whole chapter was about. That to accept Christ, you don't have to know how it works. It's just like eating, like, or I guess your engine running on fuel. You may not completely understand how it works, but that's still what is happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but isn't that the same as like natural life? Like
Yeah.
the what are they called? Like the laws of gravity kind of thing.
Uh-huh. So yeah, like, and that's pretty much like, I think what he's saying is that these are ways to kind of help you understand it, but it's still much deeper than that, and to try to still dumb it down to something like that isn't always going to be the best picture or whatever, but just to understand that it's more complicated, and you don't really have to understand it, just know that that's how it works. So, and then it goes on to say, like, how does someone like Jesus pay for all our sins or whatever? And that one I found super fascinating because he compared it also to a little more, I guess, way we would understand it, and pretty much think of it as your debts. That is, if you don't have enough money to pay your debts, then somebody with lots of assets could pay off your debts. And that's essentially what Jesus was. He had lots of assets and he could pay on your behalf. And I thought that was a good analogy. I was like, okay, I can understand that a little more. And going on to say, like, what repentance means is that starting to realize how you have been wrong, and in that realization, it's like you kind of come to a starting over and unlearning that all these things I have been doing are wrong. Now I'm going to change my ways and try to correct them. And goes on to still the whole forgiveness of sins, and how the worse you are, the more you would need it, and the less you can do it, meaning repentance. So So the worse you are, the harder it is for you to repent, because I guess you're so far from it. But only a good person could repent and do it perfectly, and only a perfect person could do it perfectly. If that makes sense. That was
I think that, wait, where are you? I thought you said, are we on the perfect whatever?
penitent. Yeah.
Oh, here I am thinking that we moved to the practical. I'm sorry. Because I saw my note there and then I was like, oh, he skipped it. And then I went, yeah, going off of what you're saying then, it says laying down your arms, surrendering, saying you're sorry, realizing that you have been on the wrong track and getting ready to start life over again from the ground floor is the only way out of our hole.
Mm-hmm.
It's like surrendering to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
God demands of you before he will take you back on which he could let you off. He chooses simply description of what going back to him is like. That's how like other religions or other people repent.
I suppose, but I think it just cleared up to me at least how the whole sins and Jesus taking on the whole sins of all of us. And it's just like the assets thing was a good analogy for me to understand it. Like only someone with a lot of good assets could pay off your debts. I'm like, okay. And everyone's debts. So I was like, okay, that paints a clearer picture. And he's like, God could only... Oh, that also... God couldn't himself walk our path unless he became a man. So we couldn't share in God's dying unless he dies, and he can't die unless he becomes a man. So it's like, okay, that's also making more sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This like goes back to me learning about Christianism, Catholicism, right? All of that. That was always extremely sad to me. Like, I don't know if I knew that I could do whatever I wanted, but one of the people, like just some random man, is going to be brutally punished and die for me. Like, why would you why would you do terrible shit? That's awful. Like, that's so sad.
Yeah, and I guess...
And that's when I first watched The Passion of the Christ, I was like, oh, because it's awful. Like how, like, oh yeah, he already died for me. I'm gonna go ahead and murder people. Ugh.
Yeah, and I guess that to an extent is what we have a disconnect with now. Like even as you're saying it, I was like, oh yeah, that is kind of what happened, and I kind of just block it out of my head.
No, it's an ugly, to me it's a very awful thought. I hope that like that's what makes me want it to not be real, I guess, is that's terrible. That's really, really terrible. And then at the same time, like some people would be like, okay, so he's already dead. He already went through that. Like, why can't I do whatever I want to do?
And I think
it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit in the next chapter, how it we have to kind of pick a team essentially, whether we're going to do whatever he says or not do whatever he says. But when the time comes, it's going to be too late.
Oh, like laying down and sitting down. Like, oh, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and lay down. I'm like, no, it's too late. Like, I'm going to make you lay down.
Yeah, when you have no choice.
You have no other choice to do so. Right, but like, there is something... Okay, so this already touches like in the next section though.
What?
There's like a really interesting... I guess it all ties in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're saying...
Yeah,
that like I'm getting all emotional because like this poor man like died terribly for the sins of everybody else. And then in this next section it says we have to take reality as it comes to us. And that's where I'm like, okay, so like, did it really happen? Really, really? And then there's like several other books that can prove, like, yes, Jesus was a real person. And I'm like, okay, but was he really the Son of God?
And that's the part that I
Like,
guess you mentioned the last
or
one.
not the Son of God, but God himself?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what you're saying, that he, in order for him to die for the sins of everybody, he had to have been born. And that means he had to suffer from infancy all the way to the age of 32
Something like
when
that.
he died, to have that that amount of goodness or humility. It's kind of mind-boggling.
And then that's what some of the other arguments are that he mentioned. It was like dying must have been easy for him because he was like a god or whatever. And it goes to give the analogy that whenever somebody needs help, it's like you're asking for help from somebody that is more powerful or more knowledgeable than you. Why would you ask for someone at the same level for help when, like,
Because you didn't want to do the job?
no, but like, I guess if you're learning a new skill, why would you ask somebody with the same skill level as you if, like, you're going to be probably stuck in the same...
I have no idea, but people do that stupid shit all the time.
I think you think that, but I think if they're asking you or you're asking them, even if you're like, you're both in a beginner class, they're obviously asking you or you're asking them because you think they already know more than you did, or they think you know more than they do. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I've also met some manipulative people that are like, oh, what about this?
Well, yeah.
And then they already know the answer and they have the exact same skill set, but they want you to do it instead of them doing it themselves.
Yeah, and that goes back to their whole moral dilemma from the past one. But so he goes to say that teachers and adults help children with things that are not easy for them. And if you need help, why would you not take help from someone who has an advantage? And he mentioned that, like, I think something about a river. Like if you're...
There's a river.
that if you're kind of drowning in the river or something and somebody's on the side of the thing, like,
right.
gonna
yeah,
pull
because they
you,
have a
it's
better
like,
vantage point.
yeah, he's like, what are you gonna say? Like, oh no, like, that's not fair, you have an advantage, like, why would
Yeah.
you should be in the same level as me? It's like, no, that's why you do ask for a higher power, like higher knowledge, higher... Does that make sense? Or
Yeah.
I can't think of the words, but someone with a better advantage to help with your problem.
Excuse me.
All right, and the last one is the practical conclusion. And this is, this first part is spreading the Christ life. I thought this one was fascinating, too. It's like that baptism, belief, and communion being the way to spread the Christ life. And he says, it's like we don't. It's one of those, I guess, things you also just have to accept, that this is the way it works, and you believe it on authority. It's like, meaning that if you've never been to New York, you know New York exists, and you believe it off of people's authority, because there's so many things that point to a New York existing. Even though you haven't seen it yourself, you're believing it on authority, and which I found super fascinating too, because I've heard this argument as far as faith, that like some people have tried to say, like, you believe certain things, like you believe that New York exists based on faith or whatever, that how do I... They try to make faith synonymous with, I guess, with authority, and I think this was a much better word to use. And some of the arguments are that it's like no, faith is not the same as believing it through evidence, because there's still evidence. There's pictures, or there's I don't know. There's other evidence to show that a New York exists, and you're believing it on authority. You're not believing it in faith, believing that, like, oh, I just, like, feel in my heart or whatever that a New York exists. It's like, no, like, and so I thought the word authority make much more sense than people who try to argue for it being faith.
It says believing things on authority only means believing them because you have been told them by someone you think trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear that on the microphone?
A little bit.
My stomach is growling.
And
Sorry.
so it goes on to mention that you are still maintaining your natural life, not making it. It's kind of the same thing with your Christ life, that you have to maintain it, or else I guess it could die off. And I guess that still goes back to the previous thing where something good can rot or spoil or whatever.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Also, it says that you've been given this life by your parents, like your natural life has been given to you by your parents, and the only thing that you do is you're keeping up a life that you got from someone else.
Yeah, you had no control over, like, you
right.
creating your own life.
Correct. And that you can drive it away. There's only one way to, like, drive it away, right? It's by, like, dying. But the rest of the time you have to feed it and look after it and cultivate it. And it's the same thing. They put it in comparison to Christians can lose a Christ life which has been put into them. But you have to make an effort to keep it. But even the best Christians that ever lived is not acting on their own steam. They have to nourish and protect and, like, cultivate their life and faith.
And it goes on to say that
the live body part.
Yeah, well, like where was that? No, something about communion. Maybe I didn't write it down, but it had to say that. Oh, that we still need to nourish, I guess, the Christ life through physical acts, because we are still physical beings, and I guess that's how we take our input, I guess. Something along those lines.
A live body is not the one that never gets hurt, but one that can, to some extent, repair itself. Same way a Christian is not man. Whoever goes wrong, they hope for being good. A greenhouse does not attract sun. Hold on.
Yeah. So, I don't know, but pretty much that's what baptism and communion was, that, like, communion feeds your Christ life, but does it... So, it's kind of supernatural and natural at the same time, so it's like the supernatural is in it. And so he mentions how even, like, he remembers learning about this, that's how that you're drinking the blood and eating his body, but it's like not metaphorical, but also, like, that's the only way we can actually take in that, is because we are natural beings, so we have to still use natural sources to... I forgot how he said it, but...
I have it here, but it was too much. Like, honestly, my notes say wow. Look, that's what I put. I was like, wow, because I was like, what the fuck is even happening here? It was so much.
Yeah.
I have to read this, like, these 2 pages, like, probably 18 times more.
Yeah.
But... And then all of a sudden, so it's like, all of this stuff, like, this is the last 2 pages of this chapter. It's like, okay, here's all of this stuff, but yes, all of this, but no, none of it at the same time. And then I'm like, the end? That's my next note. The end? Like, that's all there is to it? I was kind of upset. I am a little upset at this chapter, because it's like, so you have the choice, but you don't have the choice. But yes, you do. And this is what you do have to do, but you don't have to do this. I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. I guess at all. Maybe I need to just, like, read it over and over again. Oops, I had makeup on. Yeah. And that's how I was actually talking to you about this one yesterday, because it kind of frustrated me. And it's kind of just been, like, there. because like in Buddhism or like secular Buddhism, right, which teaches you to be the best person, the best Christian, the best whoever you are, be the best at it. And what I liked about that is that they taught acceptance of situations, any situation, right? Like, this is your reality now. And then he says that right there too. Like, I had read that quote, right, about reality. Like, oh, I didn't read it, did I?
No.
Um, so this is your reality and take it as it comes. But then it showed you how to, well, in secular Buddhism, right? It shows you just like a route, I guess, or a path that you can follow to accept or to understand certain situations and to learn and to grow from them. But this one didn't help me. It confused me. And I think that's why I was upset about it. I was like, what the heck? Like, tell me the answer. But this one is, we have to take reality as it comes to us. There is no good jabbering about what it ought to be like or what we should have expected it to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really cool. Because you take it as it comes. But then 3 pages later, or 4, 5, whatever, it got all mixed up. Did you understand it better? Do you understand these last 2 pages of this chapter? Because I don't.
Let me see further in my notes as the chapter goes on. The supernatural acts.
He
The
even
only
says
control. Well,
that he's puzzled. Here's another thing that used to puzzle me. Okay, well, he used to puzzle him. Now he's figured it out, right?
What was that?
About, like, being in Christ and Christ being within.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently he figured it out and I missed it though. Hold on. Christians are Christ's body, the organism through which he works. Every addition to that body enables him to do more.
Yeah, I have that written.
Cutting off a man's finger would be an odd way of getting him to do more work. Why is God landing in the enemy-occupied world in disguise and starting a sort of secret society to undermine the devil? Why is he not landing in force, invading it? He asks a couple more questions, and then why he is delaying? He wants to give us a chance of joining his side freely.
That all makes sense with the free will stuff.
The only thing else I have highlighted is that will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time when we discover which side we really have chosen, whether we realized it before or not. That part, I was like, that the world isn't going to last forever, and that when the next coming, I guess, or that's like, poof, it's it. That is the end of the world. That is the conclusion of humanity. Be it good or again, that's where I get messed up because you can't say good or bad.
Well, I think you can, but it's just saying that bad isn't independent of good. It was essentially the same thing, but turned bad.
It kind of reminds me of Thanos. Because, like, poof, snap of the fingers, and now, like, children are even gone.
Yeah.
Right? Half of humanity is, poof, disappeared. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Right? For the people that were affected, it's a bad thing. But is it good at the same sense that now you can all you can eat buffet of your resources?
Yeah.
That's where I guess I'm confused about this. That's why I'm like, the end? Like, that's it? Like, all right, what about my child? I'm not happy with this. But again, like from the beginning of this whole entire chapter, it's like, this isn't easy to understand.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy to understand. So apparently I'm on the right path of learning.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing I get from this was that the spiritual part and the physical part, like, there is, after reading it several times, I kind of came to my own conclusion that when people try to prove or disprove supernatural stuff, or at least something like religion through science, I think they're two different parts of like a Venn diagram. Like there's no overlap until right now. It's making me think that there's just that slight overlap where if we take communion, that's still through a physical part, but it's replenishing the supernatural part or the spiritual part, and that's probably the closest to overlap as you'll actually see. Everything else is that like that's probably like the only little gateway to it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, but that's frustrating to me because not every religion takes communion.
No.
Not every, like, that's a very Catholic thing.
Yeah.
And so
No, that's all Christians, no? 'Cause
I don't think they.
yeah.
Does like Christian, like reborn again Christians take communion?
The, yeah, I think isn't that because he seemed to mention something there too that was because he had different names for it too. He said that one of them was communion. I think somebody like supper something.
So they actually all get in line, and
I think so.
so everybody except for pantheist and
No.
atheist and
All
agnostic,
Christians. All Christians
all Christians
take
take
some sort of communion. That was my understanding, and so that to me that's the only slight overlap I saw. That like you still nourish your Christ life through that's the only natural part you would have to take it in through, because we're still mostly natural beings that have to, well, like we live in a world that is occupied by like natural laws kind of deal. Does that make sense? And humans are not purely spiritual creatures, so that's why we have to take through natural forms. And that's about as much as I have. It says you must choose before he comes rather than when you have little choice left.
I gotta chew on this. I think that is fascinating because I'm I'm very science brained, right? And so I'm like, okay, so which part of your actual cortex is being triggered by this, by the body and blood of Christ?
That's my understanding.
Like,
Was like I always said like a Venn diagram where like it shows you the overlap,
yeah,
like how much.
yeah, you said
so
that. It made sense.
So I think that part is the communion part is the only part that's like natural and spiritual overlap. Like there's really not much overlap that exists, at least upon several readings. Like that's kind of what finally convinced me that like science can't disprove religion, and religion can't disprove scientific stuff. Like they're just on totally different what do you call it, like dimensions kind of deal. Like this dimension is barely touching the other one, so you're not going to be able to prove this dimension exists without running on the same laws or principles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm at 100% with it though, because then why would the Vatican have teams of scientists? And why would I'm assuming that other Christian religions have teams of scientists to assist in like proving or disproving miracles or hauntings or exorcisms. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's another, like, I don't know, but he does go on to mention that was one of those other misconceptions that I really liked about this book. And he's like, we live in a natural world. He put us on a natural world. He's like, don't ignore the natural laws or whatever occurrences that occur. And so that's one of those misconceptions that people try to just go spiritual on everything, and God knows what he's doing and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And it's like, no, he goes on to mention, it's like, you can't ignore the natural signs. The natural signs also mean something. It's not for them to be ignored. Like he created the natural laws also, so don't just think that only the the spiritual part counts. that'll be in another chapter. I don't know if it's in the next book or what, but that for sure is coming.
This shit left me like on a balance beam. I'm confused. I don't know where to go. Do I go forward? Do I go backward? Do I go sideways?
I don't know. But
that's interesting.
I think we've talked for long enough. And this was even that long of a book. I don't know. The next books, 3 and 4, are longer, so we're going to split them into 2. It'll be book 3 part 1 and book 3 part 2, and I think book 4 part 1 and book 4 part 2 because they're longer. So if you want to read along also, or
I have to, before we close, I have to tell you how this book helped me a little bit. This is the stupidest way, but so we went to a restaurant the other day and I had to use the restroom. And so I go into the restroom and one of the toilets was like disgusting. Like it was just not flushed, right? I don't know if the person forgot or whatever. Women's restrooms are gross. And so I went into my restroom and I was like, I found one that was like clean. And I was like, okay, so I use the restroom, get out. And then I'm like passing by the next one over and I was like, what would be the right thing to do? And the right thing to do is flush it, right? And I was like, I don't want to touch it. I didn't make that mess.
It's that standard you're holding.
So
up.
what was
that little voice that told you?
Yeah. And the little voice is like, okay, well, like the good thing to do is go and flush that toilet. And the other side is like, what if that shit overflows? Now you're responsible and you have to call somebody and be like, there's a toilet overflowing. And you know they're going to be like, what did you do? You made that mess. When I didn't make the mess, right? Did I want to be blamed for it? And I was like, the good thing to do is to flush the toilet. So I flushed somebody else's stuff down the toilet. And I was proud of myself because I think, I was proud of the book, I guess, because I was like, okay, it wasn't an easy choice for me, but
that's good.
But I saved somebody else from flushing the nasty, and I did it.
Good job.
No, I think that
that's a bad job.
No, I don't know. There is no good and bad. All the time.
All right. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.